Daniel Carver sits on a folding chair at the corner of Maple Street, coughing into his fist while arranging paintings against a brick wall. His hands are cracked from years of house painting, but the canvases they created glow with something softer. Light pouring through windows, shadows holding hands, ordinary moments frozen in gold. His 9-year-old daughter Rosie sits beside him, coloring quietly, glancing up each time her father's breath catches. Daniel is not selling art. He is selling time. $47,000 stands between him and his next round of chemo, and the crowd flows past like water around a stone. Some pause, some pity. No one buys. Then a woman in a gray sweater stops. She does not look at the price tags. She does not ask about his story. She only stares at one painting, a father and daughter silhouetted against fading light, their fingers intertwined. What she does next will change everything, but not in the way anyone expects. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and old magazines, the kind of smell that clung to your clothes long after you left. Daniel Carver sat in the plastic chair across from Dr. Morrison, his hands folded in his lap, his knuckles white. The fluorescent lights above hummed a tuneless song, a sound that seemed to drill into his skull with each passing second. On the wall behind the doctor hung a poster about lung health, the kind with bright colors and optimistic slogans that seemed almost cruel in this context. A cartoon pair of lungs smiled back at him, pink and healthy and full of air that Daniel could no longer take for granted. He had stared at that poster for 7 minutes now, counting the seconds between each word the doctor spoke, trying to anchor himself to something solid, while the ground beneath him crumbled. The chair was uncomfortable, the plastic edge digging into the backs of his thighs. He shifted his weight slightly, and the chair creaked, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Dr. Morrison was looking at a file on his desk, the same file he had been looking at for the past 10 minutes, as if reading the results one more time might somehow change them. Daniel knew that look. He had seen it on the faces of contractors who were about to tell him they could not pay what they owed. He had seen it on the faces of landlords who were about to raise the rent. He had seen it on the face of the highway patrol officer who had come to his door 5 years ago to tell him that his wife would not be coming home. Stage 2 lung cancer. The words hit him like a freight train, but his face remained still. He had learned long ago how to absorb pain without flinching, how to take a blow and keep standing. 20 years of painting houses in the summer heat, breathing in fumes and dust, climbing ladders that creaked under his weight. His body had taken plenty of punishment. But this was different. This was the kind of punishment that did not care how strong you were, how much you could endure. This was the kind that simply took and took until there was nothing left. The doctor was still talking. Something about treatment options and survival rates, and the importance of starting chemotherapy as soon as possible. Daniel heard the words, but they floated past him like leaves on a river. His mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in the small apartment on Cedar Street, where Rosie was probably doing her homework right now, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth, the way it always did when she concentrated. It was in the kitchen where he cooked her breakfast every morning, scrambled eggs and toast with the crusts cut off because she said crusts tasted like cardboard. It was in her bedroom doorway where he stood every night after she fell asleep, just watching her breathe, thanking whatever God might be listening for another day with his daughter. $47,000. That was the number the doctor mentioned. The cost of 6 months of chemotherapy, not including medications, hospital stays, or the countless other expenses that would pile up like snow in winter. Daniel's insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. He worked as a house painter, cash jobs mostly, no benefits, no safety net. He had $3,000 in savings, money he had been setting aside for Rosie's future, for her college fund, for the life he wanted her to have, the life her mother had dreamed of for her, back when they used to lie in bed and talk about the future like it was a gift they had already unwrapped. Catherine. He still said her name sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was quiet and Rosie was asleep. 5 years since the accident, and the wound had scabbed over but never fully healed. She had been driving home from her night shift at the hospital, a nurse who spent her days caring for other people's sick children, when a drunk driver ran a red light. Daniel had been at home with Rosie, who was only 4 at the time, watching cartoons and waiting for Mommy to come through the door. The door had opened, but it was not Catherine standing there. Now it seemed like the future had decided to arrive early, uninvited and unwelcome. Daniel had made a promise to Catherine, standing beside her hospital bed in those final hours, holding her hand, while the machines beeped their slow surrender. He had promised to take care of Rosie, to give her everything they had planned together, to make sure she never felt alone in the world. He had kept that promise for 5 years, working double shifts, painting houses in the summer heat and the winter cold, coming home exhausted, but always finding the energy to read her a bedtime story, to make her laugh, to be the father she deserved. He drove home in silence, the radio off, the windows up despite the heat. The steering wheel felt strange under his hands, like it belonged to someone else's car, someone else's life. He pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex and sat there for a long time, watching the sun sink below the rooftops. The sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep purple that reminded him of bruises. Finally, he got out of the car and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to his door, each step heavier than the last. Rosie was sitting at the kitchen table when he came in, her math workbook open in front of her, a glass of milk half finished beside her elbow. She looked up when she heard the door, and her face broke into the kind of smile that made everything else disappear. She had her mother's smile, wide and unguarded, the kind that made you believe the world might actually be a good place. Daniel felt his heart crack just a little bit more. "Daddy!" She jumped up and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She barely reached his chest now, but he remembered when she was small enough to carry on his shoulders, when she would grab fistfuls of his hair and laugh as he pretended to be a horse. That felt like a lifetime ago. "How was your day? Did you paint any cool houses? Was there a swimming pool? I want a swimming pool someday. Can we get a swimming pool?" Daniel laughed, and the sound surprised him. It felt foreign in his throat, like a language he had forgotten how to speak. He knelt down so he was eye level with her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes were brown like his, but they had a lightness to them that he had never possessed, a sparkle that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "No swimming pool today, sweetheart. Just a regular old house with regular old walls." She wrinkled her nose. "Boring. When I grow up, I'm only going to paint houses with swimming pools and trampolines and maybe a giraffe." A giraffe? In the backyard. Obviously. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of crayons that always seemed to cling to her. She squirmed after a moment, the way 9-year-olds do when they think they are too old for long hugs, and he let her go. She bounced back to the table, already chattering about something that happened at school, something about a boy named Freddie who ate glue and a teacher who wore mismatched socks. That night, after dinner and homework and the bedtime ritual that involved 3 stories, 2 glasses of water, and 1 very thorough check for monsters under the bed, Daniel stood in her doorway and watched her sleep. Her chest rose and fell in that steady rhythm that seemed almost miraculous, proof that life continued even when everything else fell apart. She had kicked off her blankets, as she always did, and he walked over quietly to pull them back up to her chin. She murmured something in her sleep, a word that might have been daddy or might have been nothing at all. "You're not going anywhere, right?" The question she had asked him earlier, just before bed. Her voice small and uncertain in a way it rarely was. She had been sitting on the edge of her bed, her feet dangling above the floor, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. The rabbit was threadbare now, one ear patched with fabric from an old shirt, but Rosie refused to sleep without it. Catherine had given it to her the day she was born, had held it up to the hospital room light, and made it dance while Rosie gurgled and reached for it with tiny fingers. Daniel had knelt down beside the bed, taking her small hands in his, looking into those brown eyes that saw everything, understood everything, even the things he tried to hide. She had not asked why he seemed quieter than usual, why his smiles did not quite reach his eyes. She had not asked about the phone calls he had been making, the papers he had been reading, the long silences that fell over him when he thought she was not watching. She had simply asked that one question, and the weight of it had nearly broken him. He had promised her no, absolutely not. He was not going anywhere. He would be right here, always, forever, as long as she needed him. He would watch her grow up, see her graduate from school, walk her down the aisle someday, hold her children in his arms the way he had held her on the day she was born. He would be there for all of it, every moment, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday that meant nothing and everything at the same time. It was a promise he intended to keep, no matter what it cost, no matter how many paintings he had to sell, how many street corners he had to sit on, how many strangers he had to smile at while they walked past without seeing him. He would fight for every breath, every heartbeat, every precious second of life, because Rosie needed her father, and he refused to let her down. He walked to the small room off the kitchen that he used as a studio, if you could call it that. It was really just a closet with the door removed, barely big enough for an easel and a stool, and the dozens of canvases that leaned against every available surface. He had been painting since he was a boy, taught by his father, a carpenter who never had money for art supplies, but always found a way to bring home scraps of wood and leftover house paint. His father painted signs mostly, advertisements for local businesses, but sometimes, late at night, he would paint something else. Landscapes, portraits, moments captured in brushstrokes that seemed to glow from within. Daniel had inherited that gift. If gift was the right word for something that had never earned him a dime. He painted in the quiet hours after Rosie was asleep, when the world felt still, and the only sound was the scratch of bristles against canvas. He painted what he saw, what he felt, what he could not put into words. A hand reaching for another hand, light falling through a window onto an empty chair, the silhouette of a father and daughter standing together, their shapes merging into one. He looked at the paintings now, really looked at them for the first time in years. There were dozens of them, maybe 50 or more, stacked against the walls like forgotten children. He had never tried to sell them before. Painting was personal, private, something he did for himself and no one else. But now, standing in this cramped little room with the weight of $47,000 pressing down on his shoulders, he saw them differently. He saw them as the only thing he had left to give. The next morning, he loaded 12 paintings into the back of his truck and drove downtown. He had no plan, no strategy, just a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might see value in what he had created. The truck was old, a 1997 Ford that wheezed up hills and rattled over potholes. But it had been reliable for 15 years, and he trusted it more than he trusted most people. He had bought it with the money from his first big painting job, a Victorian house on the north side of town that took him 3 weeks to complete. The owner had paid cash and added a $100 tip, and Daniel had driven straight to the used car lot and bought the truck without even negotiating. He found a spot on Maple Street, near the corner of the park, where families walked their dogs and business people hurried past with coffee cups in hand. The morning light was soft and golden, the kind of light his father had taught him to love, the kind that made ordinary things look almost sacred. He set up a folding chair, the same chair he used for backyard barbecues when they used to have neighbors who invited them over, and leaned the paintings against the brick wall of a closed bakery. The bakery had been out of business for 2 years now, its windows covered with brown paper, its sign faded and peeling. Another casualty of a world that did not slow down for anyone. He waited. He watched the people pass, studying their faces, trying to guess which ones might stop, which ones might see something in his work that called to them. A woman in a business suit, talking on her phone, her heels clicking against the pavement in staccato rhythm. A young couple pushing a stroller, their faces tired but content. A group of teenagers in matching school uniforms, laughing at something on their phones. None of them looked at him. None of them saw the paintings. The first day, no one stopped. They glanced at him as they passed, the way you glance at a street performer or a homeless person asking for change. A quick look followed by a quicker look away. Some of them smiled, tight little smiles that said, "I see you, but I'm not going to engage." Some of them frowned, their faces pinched with something that might have been judgment or pity, or just the general displeasure of being confronted with someone else's need. Daniel sat in his chair and smiled at everyone who made eye contact, but the smiles were not returned. By evening, his back ached from sitting so long, and his throat was raw from coughing, a new symptom that had appeared in the last few weeks and refused to go away. He packed up the paintings and drove home with nothing to show for his efforts, but sunburn and disappointment. The second day was worse. A woman stopped to look at one of the paintings, a small canvas showing two hands clasped together in prayer. She tilted her head and studied it for a long moment, and Daniel felt a flutter of hope in his chest. Then she shrugged and walked away without a word. Later, a man in a business suit paused in front of the display, his phone pressed to his ear. He covered the mouthpiece and said, "Nice hobby. You should get a real job, though." Then he laughed and continued his conversation and his walk, leaving Daniel sitting there with the words burning in his ears. On the third day, Rosie asked if she could come with him. It was Saturday, no school, and she had her box of crayons and a stack of paper ready to go. Daniel hesitated. He did not want her to see him like this, sitting on a street corner like a beggar, trying to sell pieces of his soul for a few dollars. But she looked at him with those brown eyes, so full of trust and love, and he could not say no. He never could. They set up together, father and daughter, their little art gallery on the sidewalk. Rosie claimed a spot beside him and immediately began to draw, her crayons flying across the paper with the kind of fearless creativity that adults always seem to lose somewhere along the way. People stopped to look at her, this adorable little girl with her tongue poking out, completely absorbed in her work. Some of them smiled, a few even complimented her drawings, but still, no one bought anything from Daniel. By the end of the first week, he had sold exactly 2 paintings, one to an elderly woman who said it reminded her of her late husband, and one to a young couple who seemed to buy it more out of pity than genuine interest. Total earnings, $85. His medication costs for the month, $1,200. The math was brutal, unforgiving, a reminder that hope alone could not pay for survival. But Daniel kept going. He woke up every morning before dawn, painted until his hands cramped, then loaded up the truck and drove downtown. Rosie came with him on weekends, setting up her own little station beside his, handing out hugs and smiles to anyone who stopped long enough to receive them. His cough grew worse, a deep rattle that seemed to come from somewhere far below his lungs. He started carrying cough drops in his pocket, popping them like candy whenever the tickle became too much to ignore. Rosie noticed, of course. She noticed everything. But she did not ask questions. She simply started leaving cough drops in his jacket pockets, little surprises that he would find when he reached for his keys. The third week brought a change. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the street quieter than usual, when a woman stopped in front of Daniel's display. She was maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair and glasses that made her eyes look larger than they were. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at the paintings, moving slowly from one to the next, her head tilted slightly to the side. When she reached a canvas showing light streaming through a window onto an empty chair, she stopped and stood there for a very long time. "Who taught you to use light like this?" she asked finally, still not looking at him. Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the question. Most people who stopped asked about prices or made comments about how nice his hobby was. No one had ever asked about technique. "My father," he said. He was a carpenter, but he painted signs on the side. He always said light was the most important thing. Not the subject, not the colors. The light. The woman nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she had already suspected. "I write about art," she said. "Street art mostly. The stuff that doesn't make it into galleries. There's a lot of beauty in the margins, if you know where to look." She turned to face him finally, and her eyes were kind behind those magnifying glasses. "My name is Georgia. Would you mind if I took some photos? Maybe wrote a little piece about your work?" Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot that had been sitting there for weeks. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." Georgia bought a small painting for $40, a canvas showing a father and daughter walking hand in hand, their shadows stretching long behind them. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos of the other paintings, asking Daniel questions about each one. When he painted it, what inspired it, what he was trying to capture. He found himself talking more than he had in years, words spilling out like water from a cracked dam. She listened to everything, nodding and smiling, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather notebook. Before she left, she looked around at the street, the passing crowds, the indifferent faces. "This corner gets a lot of foot traffic," she said. "Important people walk through here. Collectors, gallery owners, people who actually appreciate authentic work." She smiled at him, a warm smile that felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long storm. "Keep painting, Daniel. Someone will see you." That night, Daniel collapsed in the emergency room with a fever of 103. The doctor said his immune system was weakened, that he needed to start treatment immediately, that he could not keep putting his body through this kind of stress. He lay in the hospital bed with an IV in his arm, staring at the ceiling tiles, thinking about Rosie at home with the neighbor who had agreed to watch her for the night. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo of her, the one where she was laughing at something off camera, her whole face lit up with joy. The screen blurred as his eyes filled with tears. He would not give up. He could not. There was too much at stake, too much to lose. He would paint until his hands could no longer hold a brush. He would sell his work until someone finally saw its value. He would fight until the very last moment, not for himself, but for her. For the little girl who asked if he was going anywhere, who believed with her whole heart that her daddy would always be there. 3 days later, he was back on Maple Street, weaker but determined. George's article had been published in a small online magazine, nothing major, but enough to attract a trickle of curious visitors. A few people came specifically looking for him, having read about the house painter who captured light on canvas. They bought paintings, 5 in the first week, then 3 more the following week. $620. Not enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. It was progress. It was proof that the world could surprise you, even when you expected nothing. Rosie had taken on a new role in their operation. She made small cards out of construction paper, writing, "Thank you for seeing my dad's art," in her careful, slightly crooked handwriting. She gave one to every customer, whether they bought something or not, whether they stopped for a moment, or just hurried past with an apologetic smile. Some people kept the cards, some threw them away as soon as they rounded the corner, but Rosie kept making them, kept handing them out, kept believing that kindness mattered even when it went unnoticed. Daniel's cough grew worse, but he hid it from her as best he could. He painted at night after she fell asleep, working through the pain and exhaustion because stopping felt like giving up. One morning, Rosie found cough drops in his jacket pocket and started a secret mission to keep them stocked. She did not tell him about it. She simply made sure there were always extras hidden in his pockets, his bag, the glove compartment of the truck. He found them and smiled and pretended not to know where they came from. It was their unspoken agreement, their quiet way of taking care of each other. The Saturday that changed everything started like any other. Daniel set up his paintings against the brick wall, arranged his folding chair, and helped Rosie spread out her crayons and paper. The morning crowd was sparse, a few joggers, some families heading to the park, the usual procession of people too busy to stop. Daniel sold one painting before noon, a small commission that barely covered the cost of gas. He was starting to pack up early, his energy fading faster than usual, when he noticed a woman standing at the edge of his display. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the paintings, moving slowly from one to the next with a deliberation that seemed almost reverent. She wore a gray sweater and black pants, simple clothes that revealed nothing about who she was or why she had stopped. No jewelry, no expensive watch, nothing that marked her as different from anyone else on the street. But there was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet authority that made the air around her feel charged, electric. Daniel watched her from the corner of his eye, not wanting to interrupt whatever moment she was having with his work. She paused at each canvas, studying it with an intensity that made him feel exposed, like she was reading something in the brushstrokes that he had not intended to reveal. When she reached the painting at the far end, she stopped and did not move for a very long time. It was his favorite piece, one he had almost not brought today. A father and daughter standing at a window, their backs to the viewer, afternoon light pouring in from behind them so that their bodies became silhouettes, dark shapes against golden radiance. You could not see their faces, could not tell if they were happy or sad, but their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, two people holding on to each other against the fading of the day. "When did you paint this one?" the woman asked. Her voice was quiet but clear, the kind of voice accustomed to being heard without raising itself. Daniel stood up from his chair, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his joints. "The night before I got some news," he said. "I couldn't sleep, so I painted instead. I didn't know what I was making until it was done." The woman nodded slowly, still not taking her eyes off the canvas. "That's why it's good," she said. "You weren't trying to make something good. You were just telling the truth." Rosie looked up from her drawing, curious about this strange woman who spoke about her father's paintings with such certainty. She reached into her bag and pulled out one of her handmade cards, the construction paper slightly crumpled from being stored all day. She walked over to the woman and held it out, her small hand steady and sure. "Thank you for seeing my dad's art," she said, reciting the words she had written so many times. The woman took the card and read it carefully, as if it were a document of great importance. Then she looked at Rosie, and for the first time, her face softened into something like a smile. "You made this?" Rosie nodded. "I make one for everyone, even the people who don't buy anything. Because Daddy says everyone deserves to be seen." The woman looked at Daniel then, really looked at him, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. There was assessment in her eyes, calculation, but also something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. She looked at his cracked hands, his worn clothes, the cough drops spilling from his jacket pocket. She looked at the paintings leaning against the wall, dozens of moments captured in light and shadow. She looked at the little girl with the construction paper cards, and the father who had taught her that everyone deserved to be seen. "You paint beautifully," she said to Rosie, gesturing at the crayon drawing she had been working on, a house with a swimming pool and what appeared to be a giraffe in the backyard. "Your father taught you well," Rosie beamed. "Daddy's the best artist in the whole world. He just hasn't been discovered yet. But I'm helping." The woman smiled again, a warmer smile this time, and reached into her pocket for her phone. She pressed a number and held the phone to her ear, her eyes still on the painting of the father and daughter at the window. "I found it," she said to whoever answered. "The centerpiece for the new exhibition." "Yes, I'm sure. Come see it for yourself." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket, then turned to face Daniel directly. "My name is Vivian Ashford," she said. "I run the Ashford Art Foundation. We bring art into hospitals, schools, places where people need beauty but can't afford it." She paused, letting the words settle. "I've been looking for something specific for our new exhibition. The theme is Light in the Ordinary. I've visited galleries all over the country, seen work by artists with credentials and connections and all the things that are supposed to matter. None of it was right." She gestured at the painting. "This is right." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He gripped the back of his folding chair to steady himself, sure that he had misheard, that this was some kind of dream or hallucination brought on by fever and exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't understand." Vivian Ashford did not smile, but her eyes were not unkind. "I want to buy this painting," she said, "and I want to commission 10 more for the exhibition. The foundation will pay you $50,000 for the original, plus another $25,000 for the additional pieces." She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, plain white with black lettering, no logos or flourishes. "My accountant will have the contract ready by Monday. We pay half up front." Daniel stared at the card in his hand. The numbers swirled in his head, impossible figures that refused to resolve into anything that made sense. 50,000, 25,000, $75,000 total. More than enough for the chemotherapy. More than enough for the medications, the hospital bills, the mountain of expenses that had been crushing him for months. More than enough to keep his promise to Rosie, to be there, to not go anywhere. "Why?" he heard himself ask. "Why this painting? Why me?" Vivian Ashford looked at him with those assessing eyes, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made the air feel still. "Because you're not selling sympathy," she said. "You're selling truth. There's a difference. Most people can't tell, but I can." She paused, glancing at Rosie, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "I'm not buying this painting because you're sick, Mr. Carver. I'm buying it because you're an artist, a real one. This isn't charity. This is investment." The words hit Daniel like a wave, knocking the breath from his lungs. His whole life he had painted in the shadows, creating beauty that no one saw, telling stories that no one heard. He had taught his daughter that everyone deserved to be seen. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped believing it applied to him. And now, this woman, this stranger with her quiet authority and her foundation that brought art to people in need, was seeing him. Not the cancer patient, not the struggling single father. The artist. Rosie tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, are you okay?" Daniel looked down at his daughter, at her brown eyes so full of hope and trust, and he felt something break open inside him. Not break apart, but break open, like a seed cracking through its shell to reach for the sun. He knelt down and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of crayons and shampoo and everything good in the world. "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy's okay. Daddy's going to be okay." 6 months later, Daniel stood in the center of the Ashford Foundation Gallery, surrounded by his paintings. The exhibition had opened to modest crowds. Not the elite art world patrons who usually filled such spaces, but ordinary people. Teachers on their lunch breaks, nurses who had just gotten off the night shift, parents with children who tugged at their hands and pointed at the colors on the walls, people who stopped in front of each canvas and saw something of themselves reflected back. The centerpiece hung on the far wall, a father and daughter silhouetted against fading light, their fingers intertwined. Beneath it, A small placard read, "Light in the Ordinary," by Daniel Carver. Father, painter, fighter. He had completed his first round of chemotherapy. The doctors said the results were encouraging, better than expected. Reason for cautious optimism. The tumor had shrunk by 40%, and his latest scans showed no signs of spreading. He still had a long road ahead. More treatments, more uncertainty, more battles to fight. But he was still here, still painting, still standing at the corner of Maple Street on Saturday mornings, with his folding chair and his canvases. Though now people stopped more often, recognized his name, asked to shake his hand. He always said yes. He always smiled. He always remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Rosie had her own corner of the gallery, a small display of her crayon drawings that Vivian had insisted on including. Future artists need to start somewhere, she had said. Rosie took her role very seriously, standing beside her artwork and explaining each piece to anyone who would listen. The giraffe in the backyard, which she had named Gerald. The house with the swimming pool. The picture of her and her daddy holding hands. 2 stick figures with enormous smiles, surrounded by yellow lines meant to represent sunshine. A woman approached Daniel as he stood before his centerpiece, lost in thought. She was maybe 60, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "This painting made me call my daughter," she said. "We haven't spoken in 3 years. I'm going to see her next week." She touched his arm briefly, a stranger's gratitude conveyed in a single gesture. "Thank you for making this." Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The woman walked away, and he watched her go, thinking about all the invisible threads that connected people to each other. He thought about Georgia, who had seen something worth writing about. He thought about Vivian, who had seen something worth investing in. He thought about Catherine, who had believed in him before anyone else did. He thought about his father, who had taught him to see light in the ordinary. He felt a small hand slip into his, and he looked down to see Rosie standing beside him, her face tilted up toward the painting. She was wearing her favorite dress, the blue one with the white flowers that Catherine had picked out. "Daddy," she said, "can I put my paintings next to yours someday? In a real gallery, like this one?" Daniel squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers against his palm. He thought about all the nights he had stood in her doorway watching her sleep. All the mornings he had made her eggs with the crusts cut off. All the moments they had shared that no one else would ever see. "You already have, sweetheart," he said, "every single day." Outside the gallery windows, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Light poured through the glass, casting long shadows across the floor. Georgia was there, watching the crowd with her notepad. Vivian was there too, moving through the gallery with her quiet authority. A father and daughter stood together in the center of it all, their shapes merging into one, 2 people holding on to each other against the fading of the day. Some people walked past without looking. Some paused for just a moment before moving on. But a few stopped and really saw them and smiled and carried that image with them as they went about their lives. A small thing, a moment of recognition. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Daniel looked down at Rosie, who was gazing at her own drawings with fierce pride. She turned and caught him looking, and her face broke into that smile, the one she had inherited from her mother. "I love you, Daddy," she said. "I love you too, sweetheart," he replied. "More than all the paintings in the world." And together, hand in hand, they walked out of the gallery and into the fading light, ready for whatever came next.